Welcome to Grief Heals, the podcast that explores how grief heals. Join us as we consider how grief invites love within ourselves, our communities, our world, our histories, and how it is that grief heals. I'm Lisa Michelle Zega here with Eric Simpson. Welcome to episode 6 of Grief Heals. Today we're going to talk about ancestral grief, the fifth gate of grief from Francis Weller's The Wild Edge of Sorrow. To recap, the first gate of grief is all that we love, we will lose. The second is the places that did not receive love. The third is the sorrows of the world. The fourth is what we expected but did not receive. And then the fifth is what we're talking about today, and that is ancestral grief. And these are all from the work of Francis Weller.
Okay. So can you maybe give me an explanation of what ancestral grief is about?
Yeah, so just imagine the grief that is carried in a person or in a group of people that is simply undigested, unmetabolized, right? And it just continues on, unspoken, unnamed, unprocessed, generation after generation. And what's wild about this is now we're able to recognize that these things can be passed down in the way that a person perceives their own life, their own experience. One story that's standing out to me just as an example of this, and forgive me, I don't remember names, but I remember that I read this story in The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate. There's a woman, and she is the ancestor of one of the men in Nazi Germany who was at the tip top of the hierarchy and planned a lot of the atrocities that happened to individuals that were persecuted and harmed during Nazi Germany. What stuck out to me in her story is the level of guilt that she felt in her body for things that she had nothing to do with. And in her journey, in her process, really came to see her own ancestral grief, name it, allow herself to experience it. And she had an experience, if I remember right, where it was almost as if she embodied this person and felt him from inside her and went through her own process of grieving and processing. And she said it was one of the most terrorizing experiences of a lifetime and one of the most healing. So really this idea of being able to name the grief, to be able to tell the story of our grief, and to be able to experience it in the body, right? Have a somatic experience, because grief is somatized. It does live in the body.
A person then would feel the symptoms of this type of loss or this type of trauma that happened in previous generations, but not necessarily know why they're feeling that. Is that
Exactly?
okay?
Yeah. And of course, all these, like when we talk about these gates, they're not linear, they're not always distinguishable, right? Like these things come together, but it can give us an insight of how we're looking at our own experience. It's just a way to frame where our grief is and what our grief is, as if the gates touch, right? Like it's like, okay, what I expected but did not receive might be right up against ancestral grief. And I'll just give an example from my own life. And I don't really know where this comes from, but I found myself thinking about it, actually like dreaming about it. And I think it might be in anticipation of our podcast. I often have a felt sense that I'm about to be in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And the sense is like like I've done something really wrong and I'm deserving of punishment. It's such an acute sense that I have found myself judging myself for it or looking for where I have done something horrible and searching for reasons that I would be deserving of punishment. Last night I was having the thought, oh wow, well, when my ancestors have done things like to harm other humans, there is a sense of guilt and shame for wrongness. I know molestation lives in my family tree, and that means that people that have been molested and have also molested others lives in my family tree. And I was just having that as a, oh wow, not like a, I know this is a hard fact of this is what is going on inside my body, but as a curiosity, oh, there's something that I'm privy to where I might feel like I could get caught or get in trouble, and it lives in my body.
It's kind of interesting to me because I can think of ancestors who have experienced great loss and who would be guilty, like the Nazi. I'm not aware of any experience, so I'm doing it backwards. But I know that, my dad's mother, so my grandmother, her great grandfather was the first convicted murderer in the state of Oregon. And his name was Nimrod. And he walked across the United States from Oregon to Washington, D.C. He did that twice in reference to this, and it was over land ownership. The story's a little bit more complicated than that, but it's all, it's online. I don't remember all the details. His direct descendants, which I guess because it's not through the patriarchy, but through my grandmother, are more aware of it, and they published books and things like that. But I don't know them. They're, distant relatives.
One of the things that's coming up for me, and I don't know, see, I don't have enough history or story, but when we do things that harm other people, I know this about humanity, there's a sense of fragmentation, right? Like we are not connected to the action in the same way. There's a disconnect, in fact. And so even the idea of not being able to connect with our own emotional experience may be a way that we carry ancestral grief. And like, it's such an honor. There is a way in which I have not only been shamed, but I have shamed other people. And there's been this arrogance in me of wanting others to do, like lean into this kind of emotional work that I do and making someone bad for not doing it. What I recognize in this journey is what an amazing honor it is to do this work and to be with grief. And as an apprentice of grief, the more grief has, let's say, held me, walked with me, the more now I look at not only my ancestors, also my posterity in this way of like, oh, wow, my healing is your healing. And I look at it backwards and turn, instead of what has happened historically is that I look back and say, oh my gosh, why would you do this? Why would you let it continue to roll down generation after generation and receive my own life experience more as a burden than as an honor? And in the way that allowing grief has ministered to me, I'm going to say, there's been a transformation where now something will happen and I feel so privileged and like a person of service and serving those behind me, like, or those who I come from, right? Even those that have passed on. So when I say my healing is your healing is my healing, that crosses time and space in my felt experience.
I think you mentioned previously there's another aspect to ancestral grief, which we can trace, at least maybe delineate, if not absolutely capture, through DNA. I think you were talking about how people will even have the presentation of their DNA change because of an experience.
Yeah, like epigenetics. So, this
Right.
idea that epigenetics is determining how a gene functions, even though it might not change it doesn't change the gene itself. And so that epigenetics is, and again, this is not my expertise, so I don't know that I'm saying it all correctly. So, any of you listening that have a better understanding, thank you for your patience. This is one of the ways that scientists have been able to understand more how things are being passed along, epigenetics, that study, and recognizing that, yes, historical ancestral grief and trauma does impact future generations. I want to bring up some more ways that Francis Weller talks about ancestral grief, and that just might help us thinking about lost language, lost land, lost rituals, lost songs, right, from heritage, thinking about this sense of homelessness, of being orphaned between lands. So thinking of migrating from one area to another area and the loss that is held there. And then the experiences of abandonment, of woundedness, of grief and shame that is housed in those changes. And then the collective soul of grief, where we're experiencing the abuses of millions. And so it's not just in our own lineage, but when I'm talking about what's living in the body, that I am referring specifically to our blood ancestors.
So, given that, would you say there could be symptoms within our society that we're experiencing now that is rooted in social grievances? What we did to the Native Americans as the 500 years of slavery.
Eric, I would say absolutely. So here's the one. I have a friend and he says, okay, look, grief must be engaged. And if it's not engaged intentionally, it will come out unintentionally, right? But it will always present itself. The way that relates to what you just asked me, when I look at the disparity in socioeconomics, when I live near Los Angeles, I live in Southern California, homelessness is an epidemic. But here's how I see it. The pain we've rejected in ourselves, within our own lineage, within our own families, within our own communities, is evidence to us, not just in things like homelessness, in addiction, the rise in suicide, like all these things show up, they present to us socially, and they are ours, and we continue to push them to the fringes, right? We are pushing ourselves to the fringes.
Well, it sounds like you're saying that we stigmatize people who are homeless or that are addicts, as well as the marginalized people that are stigmatized because of their race or their identity, and then think that we are separate from them. And there's a sense in which we're projecting some of our own stuff onto them. We think that by pushing them or marginalizing them, that we can escape being in the same kind of situation that they are in. Like if we see someone who's poor and we stigmatize them, we may not want to help them or to relate to them in any way because we're afraid that we'll become like them, as if poverty is a disease that you can catch.
Here's what I would say, just to add to what you're saying. Yes, and we already are like them. These are parts of ourselves we do not want to engage or nurture or tend to.
Mm-hmm.
So we think that we are staying safe, and it is actually killing ourselves and others. So the path that we believe is keeping us is actually destroying us. I already am poor within. And the more we learn about, let's just say, addiction, the more we understand that wounded people are simply seeking to self-soothe. We stigmatize those who are wounded. And we are all wounded. And so if you think about ancestral grief, this idea of me, I'm not like those people. No, I am those people. And what is so beautiful about grief is we can engage our own grief by getting close to the grief around us, or we can engage the grief around us by getting close to our own grief. It really doesn't matter where we start, but we live in a day and age where, thankfully, there is an awakening happening where we are tuning into our own bodies. But if we slow down and attune to this vessel that holds us, we become aware that within our body, grief is held. Eric, there is something you said, I don't know in which episode, but you defined love as attention. And that has continued to just be with me and work in me. Like, the more I learn about mindfulness, the more I learn about love, the more I learn about grief, the more I learn about healing, self-healing. It's all about attention. Attention, slowing down, give attention to the body, giving attention to the movements of the body. So when we marginalize and push away members of our society as though we're not like them, we are not giving attention to ourselves or others.
I could imagine giving a kind of attention to someone who is poor or who is a drug addict and just letting it in there, when I think love encompasses more than attention, but that's its foundation. And if we do nothing to reach out to somebody who's in need, who's within our realm, then just giving them attention isn't necessarily the best thing to do in a loving way. But we can't love them without giving them attention.
Right. In any transformational experience, first, there's a bringing of awareness. Life naturally leads to other action. I thought you were going to say something different, so I'm just going to bring up where my mind went,
Right.
because there is an attention that is like a top down, more like a sympathy, where it's keeping this line where I am different from you. So let me lean in and help you and like lift you up to be like me. I'm actually thinking of this idea of I am saving you. I am helping, like in the way that missionaries would go to other countries and then try to westernize them rather than honor them. Right. So the kind of attention that you and I believe, are both talking about is attention that honors, that respects, that recognizes we all have a unique way to healing. And even though there is a propensity within humans to, like a righting reflex, to advise, to fix, or save, we recognize and allow that people get to be loved. We all get to be loved. We all need to be loved. This is part of what has led me in my understanding that grief is love. And all these gates of grief are showing us places where love is needed. Love is needed in our histories. Love is needed as we look back at our histories. Love is needed in the losses between what I wanted and what I got. Love moves, love does, love responds, right?
Right.
But love first notices.
And if you're doing something to ostensibly help another person just for your own self-aggrandizement, the attention's probably really on you and not on the object of your.
It can be another way to hide from our own pain.
Right.
And it ends up doing harm, because when we have expectations. So I also do work in poverty. And that is one of the ways that harm is done is people come in to save and do violence to the soul of another human and then punish those humans for not performing in the way that the person helping preferred.
Mhm.
And then the person that was quote unquote helping judges that person and says, well, they just don't want to be helped. They just want the life that they have, rather than recognizing, well, how is it that I'm offering help? Am I meeting them in shared humanity? Am I coming in recognizing your suffering is my suffering? If I'm coming in to fix you, then I can guarantee that what I will do is harm because I'm already treating you like a machine.
Just incidentally, that's sort of an interesting thing to think about in terms of white savior complex. People.
Exactly. Which brings us back to ancestral grief, right?
Yes.
I believe there is grief that's carried in those that are perpetrating like that savior complex, as well as grief for those, grief in us that are victimized. And here's the thing, we are never either or. And right now I'm thinking of Cartman's triangle, but that can be a whole nother another time, another place. But the principle there is when there is there's a rescuer, there is a victim, and there is a bully. And when you're in that triangle, you will play all three roles. So if I am trying to rescue the victim, that in and of itself means I'm going to bully someone else. So I will play all three roles if I'm in that triangle.
I think that when I read Francis Weller on this gate, he emphasizes a lot the need for a community response to grief and to ancestral grief.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Mm-hmm. That is like grief is meant to be communal. It genuinely is. And that's why I'm on a mission to change the language around grief so that we're not crying alone, so that we're not apologizing for our tears, so that we can re-engage an environment, a community where we are meant to heal together, right? This is not a solo responsibility.
When we're talking about our ancestors too, that suggests the community of the family or of the, even of the human family, if we're not talking about, direct lineage, but even those who have gone before us are part of that community.
Yes, I host healing circles. And when I do this, we invite in our ancestors, recognizing we're doing this work together. And one of the most magical things I experience is there's always someone in the circle, it seems like, that represents a part of my own lived experience or history. And I find that even when it's not my direct family in the healing circle with us, I end up healing, like changing the nature of a relationship I have with another person, living or dead, through the representation of the people in the circle. Like it's a magical, mysterious, wonderful, beautiful experience. And that's part of the power of having our stories shared in community.
You've been listening to Grief Heals with Lisa Michelle Zega. The podcast is produced by me, Eric Simpson, in association with Jump Up and Down Productions. Music by Ken Delian, Drunken Nights to Sunday Mornings, and Stefan Carlin, A Calming Ocean, A Common Notion. If you would like more information about the work Lisa does, point your browsers to legityou.com. That's LEGITYOU. Lisa can also be reached at lisamichelle@legityou.com. This has been a Jump Up and Down production.